Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Old Man. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, we now finally have context of what it is that Dan, or Johnny, really did back in the day to warrant all of this. Basically, he joined forces with what is now a warlord, Franz, that basically he chose a side that the U.S. government wasn't really keen on him choosing that side. It's like, right, you're choosing to ally yourself with the enemy and turning an ally into an enemy, because Faraz was going up against Russia, and I guess it was, well, because, or at least making some, because it was about making Russia weaker, and this was in the 80s, so I mean, I don't know what, wasn't this like during the whole Red Scare thing, so wasn't like, was it the U.S. and the, maybe I misinterpret that whole sequence, but I'm like, wasn't Russia and the U.S. not on the best of terms? Because wasn't the 80s around the time of the Red Scare and stuff? Either way, Johnny wants to arm Faraz's people to fight back. It's like, right, he's like, I believe this guy is a good guy, which Harold's like, you mean all the resources that the CIA has? It has plenty of people gathering data, analytics, and stuff like that. They're wrong, and you're right. And he's like, yes. So he chose to back up someone, and he ended up getting Harold's help. Now we see what Harold's talking about, like, oh, I need to help bury this, because they basically helped, I think, push, because he's currently a warlord today, I think. Maybe he was even a warlord then, but he's definitely a very, very bad guy that they basically helped put in power. So it's like, yeah, probably not going to be the best thing. So it's like, because any actions he's taken in the future, I mean, in that time frame, in that 30 plus years, is kind of on them, because they put him in a position where he can be better off. So, but it sounds like based on later stuff that I guess Johnny found out, oh, he wasn't the guy I thought he was, and betrayed him. Because when that conversation came up, I was like, wait, is this not the good guy you thought he was? Okay, at first I was like, wait, is he the guy you betrayed to help the guy that you believe was good? But it's like, no, it seems like Faraz is the guy he thought was good. And it kind of came back to bite him in the ass, especially now, because Faraz is like, cool, I've got the time, I got the money, and the resources necessary to send the U.S. government after you. Like, I don't even have to do the legwork myself. I positioned myself in a good enough position so now that the U.S. will do the dirty work for me. Bring you to me. What he's offering them in return, who knows? But he's got the clout and position necessary, and he gathered the resources. Even the guy later on boat talks about it. He's like, it was never it was just always a matter of time, because he was always going to be able to gather those resources he needed to make it possible to go after Johnny. And even then, Harold told him, like, right, if anyone ever finds out about this, I will be the one they send after you. And Johnny just kind of smiles and laughs it off, you know, but it's like, maybe he was kind of like, yeah, I know, and just didn't care. I think it's that youthful recklessness of youth, where you just kind of do whatever you want, damn be the consequences. Or maybe for him, he felt the need to be like, no, I accept the consequences. Because now I'm wondering, the reason why he betrayed Faraz had to be about Abby then. Like, the fact that she was mixed up in all of this makes you go, like, maybe Abby was someone that Faraz didn't treat well, and maybe in that moment, well, maybe it was always about a woman, you know. It's like, oh, like maybe she was like someone that was supposed to be Faraz's wife or something, or was his wife. Either they were going to be married, or kind of like she's meant to be with him, or they were already together, and her and Johnny like ran off. So he even said it last episode, like during that little flashback, he would do it again, even if it meant to be. But Abby even said, like, oh, we're doing the right thing. So knowing that, like, who was coming after them, that death was only going to be a matter of time for what they did. But I think in the end, it was the right thing, because it's like, right, they finally saw him for what he was. And hopefully they probably thought we put a dent in whatever he was doing, but not enough that they didn't kill him, so they didn't stop him. And he's just grown stronger and stronger until he's been in this position now, all these years later, ready to come after Johnny. So to the point that Johnny ends up going to meet with someone who's kind of like a mentor, who, as he kind of describes it, he was a father to both Johnny and Harold. And it's like, yeah, he's like, if I you shouldn't have called Johnny first, Harold. You should have called me, and I would have told you not to do what you did, because Johnny is the type to never listen. In fact, he's like, we could have found a better way. And then he slides Johnny a number. I mean, he slides Harold a number, and Harold's like, if I take that number and people find out, that's going to be what's written in my obituary. Because they had this whole conversation about, right, someone had wrote him a obituary, and so like a lady called up. He's like, it wasn't about what she said, it was more so how she said it. And it's all about, the end is the only thing that matters. And that's interesting, because that does come back to some extent. That basically your entire life is leading up to what people say about you when you're dead. You want it to be something beautiful and nice. You don't want it to be that thing where people will be like whispering behind your back, being like any indictments against you. In Harold's case, it's like, oh man, Harold, great guy, all the positive things. You don't want it to be, yo, did Harold do it? Do you hear about the Faraz thing? Yeah, thing him and Dan were up to? Yeah, you don't want those whispers that kind of fall back, and that's going to land at his wife's feet, at his grandson's feet. So it's like, yeah. So it's kind of like, this is the only way to handle it, is to find someone off the books. Don't let anyone government official going after Dan, that you need someone off the books to handle it. But he had his reservations about going down that route. That's the only way to keep this secret buried, because and even Waters challenges Harold by being like, oh, like now he's looking at, he was already calling Harold out last episode, but now he's like, now I'm kind of interpreting everything from last episode as do you know why he blindsided my people like that and did what he did, drop the bodies he did? He's like, he's interpreting it as like, I feel like he wanted you in position to kind of take over this operation so that we could go by your play, which almost Harold's looking at him, that's the furthest thing from the truth. It was more so a message of showing you like, no, there's you wanted me to take option 2? Fuck that, I'm taking option 1. So that's what that kind of comes down to. But maybe you could interpret it, well, by going down option 1 route, it was always going to lead to this. So yes, in a way you could say Dan did want him to take over, because it's like, no, come after me. Once again, I will leave everyone in body bags or pieces. So it's your choice. So leave me alone. But and we obviously meet some of the people that work for Harold. In particular, Agent Adams, who is played by Aaliyah Shawkat. I didn't recognize her until she was talking to Waters and they had that close up when she was working on the computer. That's when I was like, wait, isn't that? And it's like, yeah. The thing I best know her, like, I've never seen it, but I know she's in, I want to say, Search Party. I don't know if she's like, I've always been under the impression that show's like a continuous, I don't know if that show is a continuous show, like every season's built upon each other, or is it like an anthology? I was under the impression it's an anthology. I don't know. I know she's in the show. I don't know whether like it's across all seasons or just one of the seasons. Plus, I saw her in a webtoon for the app webtoon. I know she did like a commercial for one of those, and that was kind of like my first introduction to her. And I've subsequently seen her in multiple other things, but there's just the things because I almost didn't recognize her, because more often than I've seen the 2 times I've seen her, she's had shorter hair or like curly hair, or well, shorter like or curly short hair. In this case, she has like medium length hair and it's straight, so it kind of took me for a second until we got that close up of her face. I was like, oh, that's her. So, but she's kind of like, I mean, because even Harold has that relationship where he calls her kid. I was like, well, we know whether or not it was your son or your daughter died because your grandson's parents are gone. So I'm like, so we know your child's gone. So I'm like, is this someone else that, I was like, could this be like an in-law that you're calling kiddo? But it's like, no, it's someone he took under his wing. And I love that conversation with Waters when he basically spills the beans about everything. It's like, oh, he didn't tell you about Faraz, did he? I think that's kind of interesting, because I love Agent Adams gave him kind of the middle finger. She was like, fuck you, because she told everyone to give him a hard time because he's supposed to be this, Waters is the CIA liaison. So I found that so interesting. Speaking of Rich, since we're on a subject, I do love that line from Boat being like, oh, both his sons, one that being Johnny, went off to be Lawrence of Arabia, while the other one went off to be a policeman. I love that, just kind of like boiling it down to what they both ended up doing. But circling back, Waters is trying to get because he sees what Harold's doing. It's like, right, Harold is trying to cover up his own involvement in all of this, that being his true motive. It's not about, like, doing the right thing. It's like, no, he's just trying to save his own ass in the long run. And Agent Adams is like, oh, like, you think I'm really going to turn on him? Never. Which Waters is like, right, the people who stress that the most really, really say they would never betray someone? He's like, well, you're smart enough to finish. You're like, oh, Waters is such a condescending asshole. You're just like, ooh, you're one of those people, you're like, oh, people were going to punch you in the face. I'm sure she wanted to. But she ends up talking to Harold about it later, and she's like, right, like, what was the end goal? What's the end goal? Like, how's this all going to play out? And even he's like, it's a very, very long story, and everyone's been asking, like, how, because no one knows how this actually is going to end. But for him, is I just want to close this chapter once and for all, and then just go back to my family. But it's like not the answer Agent Adams was hoping for. And I think with what he does at the end of the episode, jumping around a little bit, he calls in the hit. And he's like, are you very good at your job? He's like, well, you wouldn't have got the number. Harold's like, I'm asking you, I want to hear you say it. Are you good at your job? He's like, yeah, I'm very good at what. It's like, well, you need to be. Do not underestimate this guy. He will destroy everything in his way because it's all about survival for him. And I wonder, is he trying to say that specifically a Johnny thing? Or is that just any agent that's worked for the agency, that instinct exists inside of you? But he might be saying, like, well, because he has a personal connection, like him and Johnny go that way back, like they are that, like, deeply tied and connected. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. But I do believe, just like Waters says, I think Adams, I think she's going to end up betraying Harold, no matter how much because of just, once she finds out he crossed such a line, she's going to really be on him about that, I'm sure, and that's where she's going to end up joining up with Waters. But we'll ultimately have to wait and see where that kind of goes. That's going to be interesting, considering, like, the father-daughter relationship they kind of have. At least we've gotten this inkling of. It's really going to, I think her loyalty is really going to get pushed to the test when she eventually finds out, because I'm sure Waters is going to be the one who finds out and ends up telling her, but we'll see. So that's on that side of things. On the other side, we have Dan abandoning everything. And I love that line of, he thought being a father, being Dan Chase, will be the last time, because he's always had to be someone else. It's just the very nature of, you go through IDs and you're always playing a different role. He thought Dan Chase, being Emily's father, would be the last role he ever has to play. Seems like that's not the case. So he's got to go back to slipping into another skin, even though he hasn't done it in over 30 years, and kind of get readjusted to being someone else again. It's going to take a while to kind of adjust. So he ends up going to a place to stay, and where he meets Zoe, who's played by, was it Amy Brenneman? I think it's just Amy Brenneman. And I was wondering, it's like, why does she seem so recognizable? I know her from the show on Amazon Prime Video called Tell Me Your Secrets. She was Mary. I was like, that's why I recognized you so much. I was like, there's a long list of other things she's been in, that some of it I might know, but just skimming through her filmography, that's the thing that definitely jumped out to me, especially because it's one of the most recent things from, like, last year. But either way, he meets Zoe, and Zoe's not too keen on the aspect of, like, the two dogs. I also love that they're just sitting and staring at her while she's having this conversation, because Johnny was under the impression, like, he was going to be alone in this place, but she's staying here. She's saying, like, it's her ex-husband's place, and she's kind of, like, he's the one it's all in his name, and he kind of owns it. So she's kind of here because he was under the impression, because the number was from the area code he lives in rather than this area code, so that's why he was under the impression, like, oh, like, the person who owns the place, the owner, wouldn't be here. And she's not too keen on the whole dogs thing, but I love that he's like, okay, and he's about to leave, and you can hear the car not cranking, and he comes over to the window, he's like, you would not believe it. I was like, did that just happen, or did you legitimately mess with your own car? And he cooks for her. And I also love that conversation he had where he's like, oh, like, the person he learned from cooking was someone he met when he was in the army. Plus, there was a conversation about, like, right, that cook had heard something as a young boy about the legend of, like, this old wise man who never spoke, not because they couldn't, but basically they chose not to, because basically talking language is this. It opens up the opportunity to deceive. That there's so much truth in silence, because there's other ways to speak without words, because language can be so deceptive. You can, like, kind of, so I thought that was such an interesting allegory. And I think to some extent, obviously it reflected what was going on between him and Zoe at the time, but just in many different regards, it really reflects him because he is a man guy that seems like he is someone of a few spoken words. He talks when he needs to, but it doesn't seem like he's like overly talkative and stuff. So it's just like, right. Because, I mean, as someone who is a CIA agent too, he's had to use language to lie. So it's almost very ironic for him to tell that story because he is someone, I have to take that back then. I say like, oh, like he's a man of few words. It's like maybe in his older age, but it's like, no, because of the nature of who he is and what he's done, he's had to be a man of a person who's, uses language to, can be so deceitful. Like he would know that first and foremost. So I thought that was so fascinating. So Zoe, like the food he cooked and everything. So it's like, all right, fine, you can stay. Just don't let your dogs chew up the furniture or whatever. And basically you give me 2 months rent. And also you cook every 3 nights out of the week. So that's the deal and able to stay. So I love those dogs. Those dogs are so cute, just like how well behaved they are. Because also, it's like she's like they've been sitting still for 20 minutes. Are they sitting still because you told them to, or are they sitting there thinking of plotting something together? He's like, I told them to sit, so they're sitting. So, not knowing not trying to like talk about like dogs, like, oh, dogs are that breed. I'm not trying to be like, oh, they're mean or something, but it's like, no, his dogs in particular are weaponized. I'm not trying to allocate that to like, I'm not trying to be like, oh, pit bulls are mean and scary. It's like, no, I'm not saying those are pit bulls. I'm just saying because pit bulls kind of get lumped into that like aggressive, mean dog when they're not. Like, at least, it depends on the dog. It depends on the owner and stuff like that. But it's just like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, these dogs are weaponized and try to make them seem scary. It's like, no, they're just, his particular dogs are scary because they are weaponized. We've seen them get to work, so I thought that was interesting. And, I love that Zoe came to ask him and like, oh, dinner. He's almost like, wait, what? He's like, is it my time to go? She's like, no, let's go out together. He's like, yeah, sure. She's like, okay. I was like, wow, that happened fast. And I love that Emily's on the phone. Dad, come on. He's like, I know. I was like, I love that he called Emily about it. I thought that was super adorable. But I also love like the almost like dark humor a little bit. I mean, it's just like the casual conversation between him and, Zoe at dinner, where it's like, right, he brought up his wife, because they were comparing pills, because she's like, oh, I should have put this up. He's like, oh, acid reflux, hey! And I was like, I thought that was such a cute moment between them, where it's like, hey, comparing what pills we have to take. I thought that was actually super adorable. And he was like, yeah, this particular one. She's like, oh, like, he's like, yeah, it's supposed to help with cognitive, like, issues and stuff like that. She's like, I'm sure it doesn't work. He's like, you're probably most likely right. But he's like, yeah, because my wife died, she had dementia for 6 years and before succumbing to Huntington's disease. And he's like, better safe than sorry. And even him kind of making that joke of, oh, do people not, open up their first dates with talking about medical stuff like that? And she was like, no. Like that I thought there was like this interesting approach to that. I thought, like I said, it was almost like this, like little dark, taking some of their circumstances and adding that levity to it. Because even she was like, "Wow, I can't even talk about me and my husband getting divorced, but you can openly talk about your wife dying. Like, she's like, is that wrong?" And he was like, "No." So she opens up, and I thought, once again, this show does a really good job with these metaphors and antidotes, and I think they resonate with the very themes of the show, what we've gotten so far. But her conversation about villainy, that basically the conversation is always, and I always stick with that analogy or idiom of how no one is the villain of their own story. I think that's such a beautiful thing because it is a very human nature element that none of us ever want to view ourselves as bad guy. No one wants to ever be like, no, I'm the bad guy of my own story. And what she had talked about was her situation where the husband is like, right, we were together, we were married for like 20-ish years. I have a son off at college. And she talked about how they were making it work, issues and all that aside, until one day he woke up and he was just like, I'm done, and got a younger woman, and basically that was that. But then he's like, you're not the bad guy. You didn't deserve that. She's like, no, I didn't. No? Okay, let me tell you in another way. And basically she told the story from a different perspective of same story through a different lens of her saying like, right, I was someone that no matter what he did, I wasn't happy. So we tried, he put in the work, but no matter what he did, I was never happier. And so he found someone he didn't have to make sacrifices or compromises for, and was happier and grew bitter and more resentful and spiteful towards me until, yeah, we split. And he was like, why? And Johnny's like, why did you do that? And she was like, because she's like, I actually don't know which story is the truth anymore. Because that story changes depending on what perspective you look at it from. And it's like any story. The example I will always go to, anime nerd alert, sorry, will be Death Note, because I've never seen something that's a property that really personifies that. Because through one lens, you could say, oh, Light Yagami is the protagonist. But I'll always say that my cousin was like, when I said that, because I read, that wasn't just something I picked up. That was something like, if you read the Wikipedia article, at least from what I remember, it says Light Yagami, the protagonist. But I remember having that conversation with my cousin being like, she's like, no, Light's not the protagonist. L's the protagonist. It's all about perspective, baby. That, yes, from some people's eyes, it's like, well, the protagonist is the good guy that you follow in this story. And it's like, Light's the bad guy, right? I mean, that's also the thing. Walter White, he's the protagonist, right? Yeah, because Gus is the antagonist in that particular dynamic in the show. But it's like, well, no, it's two bad guys going up against each other. But a bad guy could be, if there's a bad guy in this series and the main protagonist is a bad guy, like the protagonist still has to be, it's all semantics, I think. And I think that's a really interesting dichotomy to kind of really break down of just like, right, it's all about perspective. I went on a very long diatribe about it, but I think that's the interesting thing and element about that it adds to that layer of what I said, that humans are complicated, and it's not just black and white. There are shades of complicated gray. And so saying that no one ever wants to think of themselves as the villains, that basically the ones that I think she was saying who are really villains are the ones who really who say that they can't play that role or something. I'm butchering that last part of it, but it struck a nerve with Johnny, and I think it made him kind of go like, yeah, I'm trying to I make myself seem like I'm not the bad guy, but maybe I actually am. And we also found out some really heartbreaking news. I don't know. It seems like they're leaning into it being like, no, this is what it is. It seems like his daughter Emily died in 2003, and you're like, she apparently killed herself. And Emily and Abby Abby and Johnny went above and beyond. I keep calling him Johnny. I don't know how I'm going to handle that going forward, because obviously even to Zoe, he's Peter, and most places are going to refer to him as Dan Chase, but his real name, what may I say that, but because even Harold calls him Johnny, so I don't know. I might bounce back and forth. I might just keep it with Johnny because that is his real name. Because speaking of Tell Me Your Secrets, I literally did the same thing because the main protagonist is pretending to has a new name, and it's a whole thing when I did the review. Regardless, we'll see how I handle that going forward, but it turns out she killed herself. So the question then becomes like, okay, so that means anytime Emily's involved, that's all in his head. That's his subconscious. I guess it's kind of playing into his mind isn't well. Maybe that's his way to compensate with having lost his wife was like the last grounding to reality he had. And now that she's gone, his brain's kind of a little lost. And that's his way to kind of grip on to, instead of floating off, he keeps himself grounded by pretending Emily's alive, or not unless they fake that. Because I kept being like, right, because they didn't include her in the first episode, I thought that was by design, because it's like, right, he doesn't get to see his daughter, so they don't want you to see it. But it's like, to see her. But now in actuality, it's like, no, it's because it's all in his head, potentially. He did get some text, but they do make a point that when a notification bar thing down, it was like a bumblebee or something, got kind of covered the number and name. So the question then becomes like, okay, so were those previous messages from years ago? Because we don't get the time frame of when, we don't get the dates. We just see the bubbles of the messages. So we don't know how long ago those messages were. Those messages could have been from years and years ago, like back before she died in 2003 or something like that. Maybe the last messages he ever got from her. Something of that nature. Did she kill herself because she found out the truth about who he was? Or was it something else unrelated? Is that why he's kind of imagining like, now he's envisioning his daughter in a way of, oh, she accepted me for who I am, and despite the ugliness of what I am, I've told her the truth, and like that's his brain's way of revisionist history, or what. I'm really curious to dive into that going forward. Like I said, I want to lean into it saying like it's probably truthful that his daughter isn't alive and it's all in his head, but it also could be a major cover up because Johnny is who Johnny is. So, which I thought was really interesting, him and Zoe going back from the restaurant, and the whole thing with the police being like asking him to step out the car and everything. I was like, because I'm surprised at first. I was like, oh, is she not going to think it's weird? Oh, he's adjusting his hair and putting on glasses? That's weird. That's suspicious. So, but when the cops, like, he's got his knife by his side, and my mind in the time frame that is that scene, from the moment he got out of the car to the end of that sequence, which was about a minute and a half, my mind kept racing on the different possibilities. The moment he comes out of the car, I was like, okay, we're going to find out these guys actually aren't cops. They're like undercover operatives or something like that, pretending to be cops. But then I was like, are they actually going to end up being real cops? Or like, how's this all going to play out? And then she turns and looks at him. And in that moment, he slices the throat of that cop, shoots the other cop, and it's like, okay, we need to get out of here. She's like, no, I can't. And she's like, I see you. And I was like, whoa, how's this going to play out? And he shoots her. I was like, what the fuck? Like, once again, my mind races so much. I was like, no, this can't be real. It's like, no, it's got to be in his head. And it stayed just a couple seconds too long. I was like, oh my God. It was where I was like, what the fuck? And it was like, no, it was all in his head. I was like, oh my God. I had a roller coaster of emotions through that scene because of that. Because my mind immediately was like, no, it can't be real. It can't be. Wait, it's real. It's real. It's real. Okay, it's not. You know, that was amazingly done. I love that. And which is kind of awkward immediately later on when she's like, hey, you want to come into my house for coffee? I'm like, after I just had a daydream or something about having to kill you because it was about like, right. It kind of fits what Harold was saying, that he will do whatever, destroy whatever he needs to in order to survive. And that's almost like, yeah, if need be, he wouldn't want to, but there's that side of him that's, you know, he said he's done some stuff he's not proud of. I mean, because even the way Waters talked about him, was like, yo, this guy was known as the Beast Who Eats Everything. That was the name that they gave him. Like, obviously, that's the translated name for it, but yeah, he was a monster. He'd sneak in, wipe a place out, wipe everyone out, not even anyone would hear a whisper. He was that good. So, and as we see, even in his older age, he still got some of that. It might not be 100% of what he used to be, but still. So there's that element to it. Him and Zoe do their thing, but then he gets visited by Abby, who talks about the only thing that matters, once again, is the end. And so she talks about the fact is that it's like, right, you stole me away and basically cut me up to basically fit into this puzzle. You kind of rounded me out to fit the puzzle of this life that you wanted me to fit. And she's like, or did I do that to you? She's like, I can't even remember anymore. Should I tell her like who and what you are? But he wanted to leave because he didn't want to drag her further into this, because she's a nice lady, got her own complications, and it's like, I don't want to drag anyone else unnecessarily into this, especially her. She's been nothing but nice. But things get complicated because he wants to be there for her, considering like, right, she talks about her circumstances of, because in the car her son called about tuition stuff. Well, it turns out the check she wrote bounced. And I think that's so interesting. And it makes sense, but you felt bad for her because her account was overdrawn by $41. I was like, that's some bullshit. Like, I get it. It makes sense. But I'm like, I mean, I get it. You're writing a check and stuff, but I'm like, that just, I mean, I guess it's like, right, you don't want people to be able to fraud stuff, so it makes sense, but it's just under the circumstances, you feel bad for her, so I'm not trying to apply this to everyone else, but just like, that moment, it's just like, right, it was $41, it's because she said that, basically the point, because she didn't check the account until now, it's like, right, my ex, has a tendency to short me, just enough when it comes to alimony, just so that, just to spite me and just to let him know, like, he's still got control, that he's the one in power. So she was, shorted her $41 just so the check would bounce and then make their son resent her a little more, and probably like, oh, like he'll probably have to go to his dad for the money or something like that. So to make her feel worse and make her feel like, oh, you're not doing your job as a mom, you're failing, and your son, because she didn't even tell him the truth, because it's just like, right, because I think she was saying, like, her son wanted nothing to kind of do with all that. And, like, if you tell him the truth, you're just dragging him in the middle of the complicated, nasty. That's also the sad thing. Like, splits, no matter what the circumstances can be, when they're nasty, they can get nasty. Even, like, well after the fact. So, that kind of sucks. Because I think for him, he's spiteful because it's like, right, you weren't happy in the marriage. I found happiness. And because of the divorce and everything, I still have to pay you. Like, having to pay, like, alimony and stuff like that, it's going to, like, it makes even, I think, if there's already spite there and then you add money into it, that's why he was like, oh, money doesn't matter. She's like, no, like, money always matters. And I think it's coming from that perspective and that circumstance. But you see this look on her face, like this relief, because I think for the first time, because her issue in her marriage was she was never happy, I think for the first time she's almost taken back, because she probably hasn't had someone being kind to her in such a long time, but I think for the first time she's probably feeling on the inside like, I'm actually happy, and it's like, I haven't been in a long time. Because he had said at dinner, right, you can't help but feel the way you feel no matter what the circumstances are. Like, if you're not happy and nothing he does makes you happier, it's like, right, like, you can't be blamed for, like, maybe there's something there, sure, but you shouldn't be blamed for feeling how you feel. But very, very interesting episode. Harold did give him not only because he caught, I guess it was on the body cam footage from the cop, so they do have a picture of Johnny when he was with Zoe when the cop stopped him. So now just going to Zoe's address, sending this hitman after him. So that's not going to go well, especially with Zoe mixed in the middle of all of this. You definitely feel like this story feels like, it's definitely going to be interesting, because this is a story you typically would see probably cut down over the course of a movie. You definitely could see this as a movie, but it's nice getting it as a show where we get to kind of take our time and really flesh out everything that's going on. Because this is definitely one of those movies you're just kind of a spy thriller action-y movie you get that's probably about 2 hours long. So I'm glad because actually I kept looking into it. I didn't see the next exact number, how long the show is going to be. I think it's a limited series as well. I know it's based on one book, but we'll see. But I think it is a limited series. But either way, I'm very excited to see where the next episode takes us, because this is where I think that kind of middle act part, and probably like the beginning of the end of Act 1 / moving into the middle section where things really get wild, especially with this new hitman coming. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm excited to see what happens next. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.